In the 5th century BC, the Persian Empire stood as the most powerful and expansive civilization the world had ever seen. Stretching from modern-day Pakistan to Macedonia, it encompassed 1/5 of the world's population, thriving in wealth, sophistication, and military dominance. By 480 BC, King Xerxes led its formidable armies against Greece, a fragmented collection of small city-states on the western edge of his vast domain. His campaign was one of retribution, seeking to punish the Greeks for their interference in Persian affairs. Yet, in his pursuit of vengeance, conquest, and eternal glory, Xerxes would find only disaster and defeat in the Straits of Salamis. The events of this dramatic conflict are known primarily through the writings of Herodotus of Halicarnassus, a historian from an ancient Greek colony on the western coast of what is now Turkey. About 3 decades after the Persian invasion, Herodotus began compiling his History, a meticulous inquiry into the war's origins and course. Like many in the ancient world, he believed in omens, oracles, and divine intervention. Yet he also recognized humanity's ability to shape its own destiny. To piece together the story, he traveled extensively across Greece and the Persian Empire, studying records, inscriptions, and firsthand accounts, weighing evidence with his own reasoned judgment. Centuries later, the Roman statesman Cicero would hail Herodotus as the father of history. War, as the ancients saw it, was the great equalizer, exalting some to the status of gods while reducing others to servitude. The conflict between Greece and Persia had deep roots, tracing back to the previous century. In the 6th century BC, King Cyrus the Great subjugated the Greek colonies of western Anatolia. However, in 499 BC, these cities rebelled, calling upon their Greek brethren for aid. Only Athens and Eretria responded. In a bold move, they set fire to Sardis, the provincial capital, and its temple to the earth goddess Cybele. What seemed like a triumph was short-lived. The Persian response was swift and ruthless, forcing the Greek rebels into retreat. It took 4 years for the Persians to crush the revolt completely. But King Darius, enraged by the Greeks' defiance, turned his attention westward. He sent envoys demanding tokens of submission, earth and water, from the Greek city-states. Many complied, but 2 did not. Athens, a young democracy fiercely protective of its freedom, and Sparta, a rigid military state that bowed to no one. Their response was as bold as it was symbolic. They threw the Persian envoys into a well, telling them they could find all the earth and water they required at the bottom. In 490 BC, Darius launched a massive expedition to bring Greece to its knees. Naxos surrendered, Eretria was razed to the ground, and then the Persian army landed at Marathon to punish Athens. Facing an army twice their size, the Athenians, joined by their Plataean allies, made a fateful decision to attack. In tight phalanx formations, their heavily armed hoplite infantry clashed with the more lightly equipped Persian troops. The battle was swift and brutal. The Persians, unable to withstand the Greek onslaught, were cut down on the beaches. Those who survived fled back to their ships. Athens was saved. For years later, Darius died, and his son, Xerxes, inherited the throne. Determined to avenge his father's humiliation, he summoned forces from across the empire, constructing a bridge of boats across the Hellespont to march his vast army into Greece. Herodotus estimated his forces at an unimaginable 2.3 million men, though modern historians suggest a still staggering 200,000. His fleet, composed of over 1,000 warships, was supplied by Persia's many vassal states across the Mediterranean. Greece, a land fractured by political rivalries, seemed vulnerable. Yet in the face of annihilation, 31 city-states united, convening a war council at the Isthmus of Corinth. Their alliance was later immortalized on a serpent column at Delphi, with the Spartans, Athenians, and Corinthians leading the list. Expecting an invasion from the north, the Greeks dispatched 10,000 troops to defend the pass at Tempe, near Mount Olympus. However, realizing their position was easily outflanked and uncertain of Thessaly's loyalty, they withdrew. Instead, they chose to make their stand at Thermopylae, a narrow pass where 7,000 Greek warriors, led by Spartan king Leonidas, prepared to hold the line. Meanwhile, the Greek fleet assembled at Artemisium to guard the coastline. Their naval alliance was fragile. Athens and Aegina had been bitter rivals until recently, but necessity forced them to cooperate. Athens, possessing the largest contingent, owed its fleet's existence to a stroke of fortune. 3 years prior, the discovery of rich silver mines at Laurium. Athenian statesman Themistocles had convinced his people to invest in a navy rather than distribute the wealth among themselves. That decision may have saved Greece. Despite their strength at sea, the Greeks refused to serve under an Athenian admiral. 2. Maintain unity. Themistocles diplomatically accepted the leadership of Eurybiades, a Spartan, despite the Spartans' lack of naval expertise. As their fleets cut through the waves, their hulls gleaming, they prepared for a decisive confrontation. Both Greek and Persian navies relied on the trireme, an agile warship designed for speed and deadly impact. Propelled by 3 banks of rowers, these sleek vessels could reach speeds of 10 knots, using their bronze-sheathed rams to smash through enemy hulls. Each Greek ship carried 14 marines, 10 hoplite warriors, and 4 archers. Commanders, known as triarchs, oversaw operations from the stern, guided by skilled helmsmen. Every ship bore a name, an eye painted on its prow to ward off misfortune. Herodotus describes the Greek triremes as more robust than their Persian counterparts, though in what way remains uncertain. Persian ships, however, carried significantly more marines, 44 in total. As war loomed, an ominous phrase would be inscribed in history. Here, the sons of Athens laid the foundation stone of freedom. While Leonidas and his men held the pass at Thermopylae, the Persian fleet sailed south along Magnesia's rugged coastline. Then disaster struck. A violent storm battered the Persian armada as it lay at anchor, wrecking hundreds of ships and drowning thousands of sailors. As if nature itself opposed Xerxes' conquest, another storm obliterated 200 Persian triremes sent to outflank the Greeks at Euboea. Thus, the stage was set for one of history's most defining battles. The clash between an empire that sought to dominate the world and a people who refused to bow. Herodotus provides little concrete evidence for this audacious maneuver, and many historians question whether it ever truly occurred. Regardless, the Greeks still faced overwhelming odds of nearly 3-1 at Artemisium. They weren't just outnumbered. The Persian fleet, particularly the elite Phoenician squadron from modern Lebanon, was far more experienced in naval warfare. Yet, over 3 tense days of battle, the Greek fleet held its ground, preventing the Persians from advancing. But on the 3rd day, devastating news arrived. Leonidas and his men at Thermopylae had been encircled. The Spartan king had fallen, along with half his force. The pass was lost. Suddenly, the Greek fleet's efforts seemed futile. With Thermopylae breached, central Greece and Athens lay defenseless before the Persian advance. As the fleet withdrew, Persian forces marched south, burning cities, fields, and temples in their wake, though Thebes, which had allied with Persia, was spared. Meanwhile, in a move that shocked the Athenians, the Greek army, dominated by Peloponnesian troops, retreated to the Isthmus of Corinth, fortifying their own territory rather than defending Athens. Realizing the city could not be held, its people were evacuated by sea to Treason, Aegina, and Salamis. The wooden wall alone shall stand, warned the oracle of Delphi. Months earlier, seeking divine guidance, Athens had sent envoys to the sacred oracle of Delphi, only to receive a grim prophecy. Fools, why do you linger? Flee to the ends of the earth. But a second oracle hinted at salvation. The city's safety lay in its wooden wall. Some Athenians believed this referred to the thorn hedge surrounding the Acropolis. They fortified themselves there, hoping to withstand the invaders. But when the Persians arrived, they were surrounded and slaughtered. Xerxes, determined to avenge the burning of Sardis 18 years earlier, razed Athens to the ground. To Themistocles, the wooden wall meant Athens' new fleet. But as the Greek naval commanders met at Salamis in mid-September, the situation was dire. A Spartan king was dead, Athens was in flames, and the fragile Greek alliance teetered on collapse. Desperate to prevent the Peloponnesian ships from retreating to the isthmus, Themistocles warned his allies. If they abandoned Salamis, the Persian fleet, faster and more numerous, would destroy them in open waters. But in the narrow straits of Salamis, the Persians would lose their maneuverability, and the heavier Greek ships would gain the upper hand. To drive the point home, he delivered a final ultimatum. If the fleet withdrew, the Athenian ships would sail to Italy, abandoning the war altogether. Eurybides, the Spartan commander of the fleet, reluctantly agreed to Themistocles' plan. But Themistocles knew the Peloponnesians could still change their minds. To ensure the battle happened on Greek terms, he resorted to deception. That night, he sent a trusted servant to the Persian camp with a message meant for Xerxes himself. The Greeks, he claimed, were in disarray, afraid, divided, and ready to flee at dawn. Just 8 miles away, at Phaleron, Xerxes conferred with his generals and admirals. Most urged him to strike immediately, convinced victory was within reach. Only one dissented, Queen Artemisia of Halicarnassus. A brilliant strategist commanding 5 ships from Corea, she urged caution. There was no need to risk battle, she argued. If the Persians simply threatened southern Greece, the Peloponnesians would rush home to defend their land, breaking the fragile Greek alliance. Victory, she said, was already assured. But Xerxes was hungry for glory. He wanted a decisive triumph, a battle that would cement his name in history. Then came the message from Themistocles, confirming his belief. The Greeks were panicking and would scatter at first light. Convinced he could deliver the final blow, he ordered the Persian fleet to set sail that night, ready to annihilate the Greeks as they tried to escape. Meanwhile, in the Greek camp, an Athenian named Aristides arrived, carrying sacred relics from Aegina to inspire the fleet. He brought urgent news. The Persian navy had already put to sea, blocking the straits. Themistocles' ruse had worked. There was no retreat now. The Greeks would fight. O divine Salamis, you will be the death of mother's sons. The battle that followed, immortalized by Herodotus and the playwright Aeschylus, remains one of history's most defining naval engagements. Though some details remain ambiguous, enough evidence survives to reconstruct the most likely sequence of events. The Persian fleet, numbering around 600 triremes, outmatched the Greeks nearly 3-2. Expecting fierce resistance at the mouth of the strait, they deployed 400 soldiers on the tiny island of Citylea, ready to kill any Greek survivors who washed ashore. Then, in the dead of night, the Persian fleet advanced silently into the Narrows, their elite Phoenician ships leading the way. The final battle was about to begin. According to the later historian Diodorus Siculus, the Persians had also dispatched an Egyptian squadron around Salamis to cut off any Greek escape into the Gulf of Megara. However, earlier sources make no mention of this maneuver, leading some historians to question its authenticity. At dawn, Xerxes took his place at a vantage point overlooking the strait, confident that his presence would inspire his fleet to fight with greater determination than they had at Artemisium. Beside him stood royal scribes, ready to record the names of those who fought with distinction and those who failed. Across the northern side of the strait, the Persian fleet lined up, expecting to hunt down Greek ships as they fled. But instead of a desperate retreat, they witnessed something else entirely. Emerging from the bays of Salamis, 368 Greek triremes advanced in battle formation. The Athenians anchored the left flank, the Aeginetans the right. As they rowed forward, their voices echoed across the water in a chorus of battle hymns. At first, the Greeks held their formation, possibly waiting for the morning breeze to give them an advantage or for more Persian ships to crowd into the already narrow strait. Then, a single Greek trireme spotted an opening and struck. In moments, The entire battle erupted into chaos. In the confined waters of the strait, Persian squadrons quickly fell into disorder. Ships maneuvering to withdraw crashed into others surging forward, their captains eager to impress the watching king. The situation worsened for the Persians. Their rowers had been at their oars all night, while the Greeks were well rested and fighting for their homeland. The heavier Greek triremes, reinforced for ramming, shattered the lighter-built Phoenician vessels, sending wreckage and drowning men into the churning sea. Amidst the growing carnage, several Phoenician captains, having abandoned their wrecked ships and swum ashore, were brought before Xerxes. Seeking to shift blame, they accused the Carians and Ionians of cowardice. But at that moment, the great king saw with his own eyes an Ionian ship ram into an Athenian trireme, only to be struck in turn by an Aeginetan vessel. Rather than retreat, the Ionian marines boarded their attacker and seized it in fierce combat. Their bravery infuriated Xerxes. Betrayed by the Phoenicians' lies, he immediately ordered the accused captains to be executed. The strait became a graveyard of splintered ships and floating corpses as the battle turned decisively against the Persians. The Greek playwright Aeschylus, who almost certainly fought at Salamis, later described the slaughter as akin to fishermen spearing helpless tuna. As Persian ships attempted to escape, they were intercepted by the Aeginetans, whose fleet fought with unmatched ferocity that day. Among those desperately trying to flee was Queen Artemisia of Halicarnassus, the only Persian commander to have previously advised caution. With an Athenian trireme in pursuit, she found her path blocked by an allied Persian vessel. Without hesitation, she ordered her ship to ram the friendly vessel, sending it to the depths. The Greek captain, seeing this, assumed she must be an ally and abandoned the chase, allowing Artemisia to slip away unnoticed. Xerxes, witnessing her ruthless maneuver from his high vantage point, reportedly remarked, "My men have become women, and my women men." Meanwhile, Aristides, the Athenian general, led a force of hoplites in a final, merciless act, landing on the tiny island of Citolea, where the Persians had stationed 400 elite troops to finish off Greek shipwreck survivors. He massacred them to the last man. By the battle's end, the Persians had lost nearly 200 ships and an estimated 12,000 men, among them their fleet commander, Ariobanes, a half-brother of Xerxes himself. The Greeks, by contrast, had lost only 40 ships. It was one of the most lopsided naval victories in history. Our land mourns for the men she bore, slaughtered for Xerxes, who has fed hell's hungry jaws with Persian dead. Xerxes had suffered a humiliating defeat, shattering his dream of a swift and total conquest. Now, at last, he heeded the advice of Queen Artemisia. He would return to Asia with the majority of his army, leaving his trusted general, Mardonius, to continue the campaign in the spring. If Mardonius triumphed, the glory would belong to the great king. If he failed, the blame would be his alone. But there would be no victory for Mardonius. The following summer, he faced the combined Greek army at Plataea, where he and much of his force were annihilated. That very same day, according to Herodotus, the Greek fleet struck another devastating blow at Mycale, destroying what remained of the Persian navy. With that, the Persian threat was over. In the years that followed, the Greeks launched their own counteroffensive, forging the Delian League, a new alliance that would take the fight to Persia. The victory at Salamis has since been hailed as one of the most pivotal battles in history. It saved Greece from subjugation and cleared the way for the rise of its classical age, an era that saw the flourishing of art, democracy, philosophy, and science. Some have even called it the battle that preserved the cradle of Western civilization. This claim, however, is often overstated. A Greek defeat would not necessarily have erased Greek culture, nor was Athens' experiment in democracy the sole foundation for modern democratic systems. Yet, Salamis was undeniably a turning point, one of the most celebrated struggles against overwhelming odds in recorded history.